Hello everybody, John here from the Sports Department, going over tonight's 4-game LPL LCK slate, and I do think there are some kind of sleeper bangers on this slate, so we'll have to see how it all plays out here. But I think one of the most interesting things is this first match with RNG at -2,000 coming up against OMG at +900. OMG with 2 matches down so far this season, win and a loss. They beat Invictus and then took a loss to Rare Atom, so they've played middle of the table, decent, solid teams. RNG has not played yet in the regular season, and I'd theorized before, and I'm going to continue to stick to that theory, that this is not necessarily a great metagame for RNG. That said, RNG is just a significantly better team than OMG, so it's not like they're not huge favorites here. But we haven't seen them play. I really wish that this game had taken place much earlier in the season, because I talked about it a lot before, but I really like playing against teams that are just coming back from something like MSI. I think there's a lot of value to be had when those teams haven't really been able to prepare that well, and the other team has had a chance, knowing they were going to be playing the MSI team for 3 weeks or whatever. They've been doing nothing but preparing for them while the other team was off at MSI doing their thing. But since RNG didn't play for like the first 2.5 weeks of the season, they've had plenty of time to prepare for an OMG matchup, and they've gotten to watch them a couple times. So if anything, maybe this is actually good for the RNG side. Even though generally I would love to be on the dog here, I think I'm not going to find myself on much OMG as much as I usually like these kind of spots. I think even though the meta is not great for RNG, I think this is a decent. They're decent enough for them, considering how high quality their players are compared to the OMG players. You can see the OMG stats so far this season: under 1,700 for GPM, a -151, only 8 and 20 on First Blood and First Turrets, and only a 31% Dragon. That said, they've lost 3 games now, and they're still only averaging a 13 death per loss out of 3 games. RNG's a pretty bloody team, but we may not see. It may not be as insane as projections might say in this matchup, with OMG being a little bit less bloody, it seems like, this season versus last season. Their wins have been pretty bloody with 20 KPW, but that DPL is a little scary as we start to build up our track record for them. They've now lost 3 games, and so it'd only be at 13 through 3 games. A little on the sketchy side to want to play against. Going to the second match of the day, Suning at -650 up against Ultra Prime at +400. Ultra Prime is a defying expectations team for the season for me so far. I thought they were by far the worst team in the league. I still think they might end up being the worst team in the league come the end of the season, but they've certainly performed pretty alright for a team that's 1-2. They lost to FPX, they lost to LGD, and they beat Rogue Warriors, so the only team they've beaten is arguably the worst team in the league. That said, 1797 is a pretty good number, better than Suning has done so far in their 2 series. Suning's 2 opponents were pretty tough. It was WE and Invictus, so 2 reasonably tough opponents. But 1797, they both have 2 losses. Ultra Prime just has that win over Rogue Warriors to bolster their stats a bit. 1797 to 1714, -28 to -114. Suning with only 16 and 16 in First Blood, First Turret through their first 2 matches. Once again, tough opponents, but that's pretty low. 75-25 for Ultra Prime. In Dragons, Suning only at 27% to Ultra Prime's 60. I think that Ultra Prime might end up being the worst team in the league, or close to it. I think Suning is a pretty good team, somewhere middle of the table, 9th, 10th, somewhere in there. That said, this seems like a decent spot for Ultra Prime, man. I mean, so far through the season, even though they have a win to bolster the stats, their numbers are just better than Suning's, and they have some things going for them. I don't think Suning's bot lane has performed as well as they would like, and Ultra Prime's combination of SMLZ and Xiaoxi is working out for them so far. I still think there's definitely some weakness in the Ultra Prime lineup, but I think Ultra Prime is definitely worth GPP shots today. More so than their upwards performances, I'm very worried about Suning's downward performances. I mean, you can see these stats. I mean, I know they played tougher teams, but these are some pretty abysmal stats even against tough teams. So Suning just generally not looking like they're in for a strong season here, and I kind of like Ultra Prime as a good GPP target for an upset. Going over to the LCK, first matchup of the day, Sandbox +190 up against HLE -260. I haven't looked at the projections really other than a quick glance here. Excuse me. But my general assumption is that this is a match that we may want to target. So far, Suning with 1649, HLE with 1601. We should keep in mind Uh, excuse me. Both these teams are 0-2. HLE has played a murderer's row. They played GenG and T1 so far, so it's kind of expected that they're 0-2. Sandbox, on the other hand, impressive, not as impressive opponents, Freda Brion and Nongshim. So their stats should be a little better by virtue of that. But once again, it's a little close. 1649, 1601, minus 206 to minus 333. So far, HLE has 0% First Blood and 8% Dragons. Versus 60% First Blood and First Hurt for Sandbox. 29% Dragons, still obviously pretty bad, but it's better than 8%. Herald percentage, HLE up by just a couple percent, but both these teams seem like they like to go for the early Heralds. At 15 minutes, Sandbox doing a little better at minus 400 versus minus 663. Now, like I said, HLE's opponents were much, much tougher, so it's not like we should be saying that Sandbox should be favorites here, but it feels like Sandbox is definitely at least GPP playable. I think HLE is cash playable. I definitely think HLE is a good size favorite. I think this minus 260 number is pretty representative. I think that's a solid number for them. But that's cash playable for me. So I think HLE can make its way into the cash lineups. Sandbox makes a very good GPP target along with Ultra Prime, I think. Especially getting I think a 4-stack of Sandbox makes a ton of sense. If Sandbox does win this series, I would expect it to be pretty bloody against HLE, assuming that HLE doesn't later in this split show to have slowed down quite a bit, because last split HLE was definitely a target team in the LCK. Unfortunately, Sandbox doesn't have very many game wins, but in their one game win, they have only got a 12 kill per win, which is not exciting. Both teams have a 19.2 death per loss, though, or 19.2 and 19. So, leaning towards maybe this is a targetable matchup. It feels like one I'm probably going to target a fair bit tonight. And the last matchup of the day, GenG at plus 500, Nongshim Red Force at plus 320. GenG undefeated so far this season. Nongshim Red Force undefeated so far this season. Nongshim has beaten DRX, KT Rolster, and Sandbox, so not the most impressive lineup. GenG has beaten DRX, HLE, and KT Rolster, so the same thing, except instead of Sandbox, they beat HLE. Neither team was insanely impressive, but given how similar their records are, I think these numbers should be fairly true for them so far this season, which has GenG at 1862 to 1805 for Nongshim, plus 191 to plus 95, 7550 to 3344, 65 to 53, and 62% Heralds to 50%. At 15 minutes, GenG is up about 300, Nongshim down about 733. So that's interesting. Nongshim 3-0 on the season, but down over 700 gold at 15 minutes. GenG is a big favorite. I mean, minus 500 might be a little bit heavy. I can see targeting Nongshim in the GPPs if you wanted to take a shot. My biggest problem with doing that is that I just think this is the matchup you fade. 16.1 kill per win for GenG, 16 for Nongshim, 14 death per loss for GenG, 15.6 for Nongshim. By far the lowest numbers. I'm sure that that's the reason why in this slate we just end up getting bitten in the ass by this game just somehow becoming a super bloodbath, but this definitely feels like the fadeable matchup. In addition to the fact that, I mean, it's a second game in an LCK slate, so no guarantee that they're... I mean, these teams are not teams that are looking like they're going to do any subbing, really, but you never know in the LCK. I mean, you saw what happened last night with Malrang, so you never know exactly what's going to happen, and so this matchup just feels like a pretty easy fade for me. Going into ownership, I think RNG still probably holds the title. They have an easy matchup against a team that's historically pretty bloody, even if they haven't really been so far this season. HLE's pricing makes them too attractive. I think people will be on them for sure. GenG makes some sense. I accidentally put Sandbox here when Sandbox was not who I meant. Who was this supposed to be? It's Sunning. Sunning in fourth. Ultra Prime, I think people will see Ultra Prime as a reasonable underdog. Sandbox, and then Nongshim and OMG coming in at the bottom. I think OMG is pretty unplayable for most people. Nongshim being second game LCK and in a very hard matchup. It just makes too much sense to have Sandbox and Ultra Prime be the best owned underdogs. It might be Sandbox above Ultra Prime. Their money line is better. So if people are just looking at the money lines, Sandbox is a better play than Ultra Prime. But I think both of those teams make very good GPP targets. Looking at scoring for the favorites. Oh. For some reason, Ultra Prime. Oh, there we go. I just hadn't clicked them properly because their thing is broken. Okay, looking at the scoring for favorites, it's RNG followed by Suning, HLE, and GenG in last. RNG, Suning, HLE, GenG again. RNG, Suning, HLE, GenG again. And the same. And the same. Universal. RNG, Suning, HLE, GenG. So HLE not as exciting according to projections as I might have thought. Oh no, wait, it's not. Sorry guys, I did not have this thing clicked. It was just showing them in order. So at top lane, it's RNG, Suning, GenG, HLE in last. At the jungle, RNG, GenG, HLE, and Suning in last. In the mid lane, Chovy is first, which is not surprising, and then RNG, Suning, and GenG. At AD carry, RNG, Suning, HLE, GenG, and at support, HLE, RNG. So RNG unanimously the highest scoring team, and then it's kind of a mix between Suning and HLE for the next spot. GenG definitely unanimously the lowest scoring of the favorites. As far as cash goes, I feel pretty safe playing any of these four teams in cash. So let's look at all the combinations. We'll go HLE RNG, HLE GenG, HLE Suning, RNG GenG, RNG Suning, and GenG Suning. Let's see what we come up with for all the various combinations. HLE and RNG to start. Let's bop that down. You get a Xiaohu captain. It's a 3-3. Just looking to see if there's... I doubt there's anywhere that I can get an upgrade to a fourth RNG player. What if I switched the captain spot to Morgan? Captain with Xiaohu? That opens up $400, which is not enough to make one of those two upgrades. So you're looking at a 3-3. It's top lane captain. It's not one of the sexiest things I've ever seen, but those are the teams that you would be wanting to have for sure. I think those two or RNG Suning. So still might end up being the highest projected. Let's see at 603.4. What if we go to HLE and GenG? Keep in mind that just because GenG projects the lowest doesn't always mean that they're not going to be playable when it comes to this. If it's giving you significant upgrades in the captain spot like we're seeing right here, going from Xiaohu captain to a deft captain is making a pretty big difference. This does leave 900 on the table to the point where I would probably make a switch. Like there's a 1 point difference between Rascal and Morgan. I think I would just switch that over to Morgan and play this version, but that gives you a 610.2. Pretty significant upgrade, even though GenG is an overall lower scoring team. So this makes reasonable sense as a lineup, I think. Let's look at HLE and Suning. Suning is probably the team that I'm least interested in playing in cash, but I do think they're cash playable. Let's see, can we switch that over and get a fourth HLE player? We can. We already have Johan captain. Bin out projects for 4, where Juan Vin only out projects for 1, so I think I would switch over to either this version if I was going to play this, which is a 593.9, or you could switch over to a 4 Suning version. You would want on 200 left over. Can we switch SOFM and Johan? We can. So this is 594.3. $594.3. Sorry, hopefully the dogs will chill. 594.3 with the 4 Suning version, which is slightly better. So that's the one you'd want to go with if you want to play HLE and Suning. I don't think there's a ton of reasons to go HLE and Suning, but we'll see how this plays out elsewhere to see if there's some reason why maybe that could be the right thing to do. RNG GenG. It is Wei captain in this version. Definitely no making any upgrades there. Definitely no making any upgrades there. The RNG player is quite a bit more expensive. If we switch to Clid Captain, I still don't think there's going to be a way, but just to check on it. That leaves you 500, which is not enough to upgrade either of these other positions. It's actually it's $800 difference between Rascal and Jiaohu, and 1,000 difference between Ming and Life. So just huge differences in price. So I think you would just go with the 3-3 if you want to play this combination, and that is a 602.9. So very similar to the HLE RNG one that we had earlier for RNG and GenG. If we wanted RNG and Sunning, Ming Captain with 4 RNG, I mean that does feel nice, like it's a kind of clean looking lineup there, but a 575 projection tells me we're never touching this version of the lineup. So let's go to GenG and Sunning as the last one. That is an 80 carry captain. You could play 4 of either. Probably you make this change if you're going to go for GenG, assuming that it allows you the Sunning team slot. It does, so 584.9. Not exciting. Or if we wanted to switch this to 4 Sunning, is that doable? Not doable there. Only a 400 bump. We can't afford a 400 bump either, though. So you'd probably be looking at having to downgrade Captain if you wanted to do that. I don't think it's going to get us into the 600s even, so it feels like this one's probably just not touchable either. It feels like you're making a choice between one of these three. HLE GenG shows up the best at 610.2. I have no issue with that. If you don't want to be under the thumb of RNG, which makes some sense to me, then the RNG GenG at 603 or RNG HLE at 603 make the most sense. I think RNG HLE is probably where I'm going to end up. I definitely don't want to be under the thumb of RNG. And this seems like a reasonable way to do that since I think HLE has a lot of upside on this slate. I think this is probably the way that I go. Yeah, this feels like probably what I end up on, which is, I don't like playing the 3-3, but we already kind of looked at this lineup, and it's really not easy to get away from it in this spot. So I think this seems reasonable to me. Probably for cash, we'll look at this, and then for GPPs, you're going to find me on some Ultra Prime, you're going to find me on some Sandbox, probably with RNG as the majority of the favorites, maybe some Sunning with my Sandbox, and some HLE with my Ultra Prime. That feels like probably where I'm going to go with a fade on the GenG Nongshim game. So that'll be all for this slate, guys. I appreciate you. Sorry for the late videos. They will start being earlier from now on. I was playing this poker game for like 3 or 4 days in a row where I was up until 6 o'clock in the morning every day, and so I had to get a little nap in before I got up and did the videos and everything. But I'm back on schedule now, and we'll be ready to go for the future. So I appreciate you guys, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Make sure to hit me up in the Discord or on Twitter if you need help with anything. See you later, guys.